Okay, so here's part 2 of me rereading Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Looking at them, Snow White could easily guess the name that belonged to each dwarf. "And you must be Grumpy," she said with a giggle, folding her arms to imitate him. And Snow White introduced herself and told the dwarves about the Wicked Queen and how the animals had rescued her from the forest. "Please don't send me away," she pleaded. "If you do, the Wicked Queen will surely find me." The dwarves took pity on Snow White, and when she told them that she would clean the house clean and cook for them in return for their kindness, they quickly decided that she would stay, all except Grumpy, who simply said, "Humph." He wanted nothing to do with the Wicked Queen or a tidy princess. Back at the castle, the huntsman had delivered the box back to the Queen. He had fooled the Queen by placing a pig's heart inside instead of Snow White's. Thinking that Snow White was dead, the Queen eagerly asked the magic mirror on the wall, who now is the fairest one of all. But the mirror replied, "Over the 7 jeweled hills, beyond the 7th fall, in the cottage of the 7 dwarfs, dwells Snow White, the fairest of them all." The Queen was enraged. Snow White was still alive. The Queen stormed down the winding staircase that led to a dark dungeon beneath the castle. There she went to hide to a hidden room filled with bottles and potions and a book of magic spells. She opened the book and, finding a spell for a disguise, mixed a terrible potion. Then she drank the brew and was instantly transformed into an ugly old hag. Next, the Queen found another spell, and following the recipe carefully, filled her cauldron with bubbling liquid. She took an apple and slowly dipped it into the poisonous potion. And now, she cackled, a special sort of death for one so fair. "One bite of this poisoned apple and Snow White will close her eyes forever. Then I shall be the fairest one of them all. All once more." Whoops. I am so sorry. I cannot read today. Far away from the castle dungeon, Snow White and the dwarves were about to have dinner. "You'll just have time to wash," Snow White decided. "Let me see your hands." One by one, the dwarves slowly took their hands from behind their backs and showed them to Snow White. "Worse than I thought," she said. "March straight outside and wash, or you'll not get a bite to eat." The dwarves didn't really want to wash, but they were willing to do it to make Snow White happy, except Grumpy. "Her wiles are beginning to work," he muttered. He stood groaning and grumbling as he watched the others. Well, let them. He was not going to wash. Six dwarves quickly scrubbed up. Then they all turned to Grumpy, and before he knew what was happening, they jumped on him. "Get him!" shouted Doc. They grabbed Grumpy and pulled him over to the tub, where they washed his hands and face and even his beard. Now all 7 were ready for dinner. When they had finished eating, it was time for some fun. The dwarves played their musical instruments while Snow White danced around the room. Each dwarf took a turn dancing with Snow White. The last was Dopey, who climbed on Sneezy's shoulders and covered them both up with a long cloak. Now he was tall as Snow White, but only until Sneezy sneezed Dopey right off his shoulders. While laughter rang out from the dwarf's cottage, the Wicked Queen began her journey to find Snow White. Disguised as a peddler woman, she took a boat across the moat that separated the castle from the forest. She placed the basket of shiny red apples at her feet, and on top was the poisoned fruit intended for Snow White. The next morning, the dwarves prepared for another day of their diamond mine. Each one said goodbye to Snow White, and as he did, received a kiss on the head in return. Even Grumpy didn't seem to mind much being kissed on by the princess. "Now I'm warning you," he said. "Don't let anybody into the house." "Why, Grumpy," she exclaimed, "you do care." After she had waved goodbye to the dwarves, Snow White decided to make them a pie for dessert that night. Her animal friends looked at her as she mixed the dough and rolled it out. She especially wanted to make the pie for Grumpy because he seemed to have a sweet side to him after all. While Snow White worked, she thought about the handsome prince she had met at the castle so well. She wished he would find her, then she would feel truly safe. Suddenly, the queen, disguised as an old peddler woman, appeared outside the window, interrupting Snow White's daydream. The animals, becoming frightened, scurried away to hide inside the cupboards and behind the furniture. "I see you're making a pie," said the hag. The hag said in a gravely voice, "And I have just the thing. It's apple pies that make the men folks' mouths water." She held a beautiful shiny red apple out to Snow White. "Go on, have a bite." The animals sensed something terrible was about to happen and emerged from their hiding places. They went outside and tried to chase the hag away. Snow White didn't understand why they were behaving badly, so she shooed them off. And she invited the old woman inside. The animals raced into the forest to get help from the dwarves. The animals ran and flew as quickly as they could. When they finally reached the diamond mine, they found the dwarves hard at work. The animals pulled and tugged on their clothing, trying to tell them that Snow White was in danger. "They aren't acting this way for nothing," Grumpy said. "Maybe the queen's got Snow White," Sleepy said with a yawn. "The queen! That was it." There was no time to lose. The dwarves grabbed their picks and clubs and ran to the rescue. They didn't know it, but they were too late. Snow White had already taken a bite of the poisoned apple and was lying lifeless on the floor. The queen cackled with glee. "The only thing that can save her now is a kiss from the one who truly loves her. But no prince will ever find her," it was Itchy, "in this great big forest." Still in her disguise, the wicked queen ran out of the cottage. The bright sunshine had been replaced by dark, threatening clouds, and the air was damp and cold. At the moment, the dwarves neared the clearing and saw the queen fleeing into the forest. With the help of the animals, they chased her through the trees. The sound of thunder boomed overhead and lightning flashed in the sky. The rain began to pour down. The dwarves could hardly see, but they managed to trap the queen on the narrow cliff. She began prying a large boulder loose, intending to send it toppling onto the dwarves below. The queen's laughter echoed as the boulder began to move. "Look out!" cried Grumpy to the others. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning lit in the air and struck part of the cliff where the queen was standing. The piece of rock broke away and sent the queen falling into blackness far below, never to be heard from again. When the weary dwarfs returned to the cottage, they found the poisoned Snow White. Unable to awaken her, they laid her across their beds. Their tears streamed down their faces as they knelt beside her motionless body. Even in death, Snow White was so beautiful that the dwarfs could not bring themselves to bury her. Instead, they laid her in a casket of glass and gold, and they kept watch over her day and night. Oops, sorry. The book's not over yet. Far away in another part of the kingdom, the handsome young prince heard of the beautiful maiden who slept in the forest. Hoping that this was the princess he had fallen in love with at the well, he searched far and wide to find her. One day he was out riding. He came upon her casket, gently lifting the glass lid, and gazed at Snow White's beauty once more. The handsome prince bent down softly and placed a kiss on Snow White's lips. Then he knelt and bowed his head in silence, surrounded by the animals and the 7 dwarfs. At a moment, the princess began to stir. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. Snow White was alive. Joyously, the prince gathered her in his arms while shouts of jubilation rang out around them. The dwarves hugged each other with happiness. Snow White kissed each dwarf goodbye, then the prince lifted her upon his horse and led her to his castle on the hill. Though the dwarfs would miss Snow White, their hearts were glad because they knew that she and her prince would live happily ever after. Okay, so I hope you guys like this me rereading Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs in the new reading corner. I hope this is better too, because I think the lighting's better and then everything doesn't look so orange, or I'm not shoving it in the camera and blocking the light. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in another video.